Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started if everybody can hear me okay. My name is Richard Montgomery. I serve as MSBA Legislative Director, and welcome to another edition of Coffee and Conversation with Legislators. And today, former Senator Bobby Zirkin is going to be interviewing our guest, who in this case is Senator Brian Feldman from Montgomery County, who represents Senate District 15. And that contains Potomac, among other places. And I'm sure the senator will tell us a little bit about his district. He serves as vice chair of the Senate Finance Committee. Previously, when he served in the House, he served on the Economic Matters Committee and was chair of the Montgomery County House delegation for actually quite a long time, from 2007 to 2013. Anyway, at this point, we've got a lot to cover, so I'll turn it over to Senator Bobby Zirkin. Bobby, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Richard, and good morning. Good morning, Senator Feldman. Great to have you here.
Great for the invite, Bobby.
So we have a ton to get to today, but you are, as Richard just said, the vice chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and we're going to talk about that and things related to cannabis, which obviously is a huge issue in Maryland now, and healthcare policy and energy policy. So a lot to get to in an hour. Before we get started with substantive issues, if you could just kind of introduce yourself to the State Bar Association in terms of, what you do in the off session, how you got into politics, just a little general 101 of Senator Brian Feldman.
Sure. So I'm not a native Marylander. I have to put that out there. I'm a product of Pittsburgh Public Schools. Grew up in the city of Pittsburgh.
A big Steelers fan, I hear.
That's fair. Boy, I see so many familiar faces. Including can I just give one shout? I see my delegate district mate Kathleen Dumais on the line here. This is so fantastic. Grew up in Pittsburgh. Went away to college, came back to law school at the University of Pittsburgh, and then after that, things were going so great in the economy in Pittsburgh on the lawyer side of things, and had some opportunities in DC for some job opportunities. So that's what brought me to the DC area. I moved to DC, found myself first in the CPA world, then in the lawyer world. So I was a Justice Department lawyer for quite a long time before I got into politics. I was a DOJ litigator. I litigated federal tax cases and other kinds of things for over a decade at DOJ in DC. And just as an aside, since my wedding anniversary was this past week, my wife was a DOJ lawyer, and I met my wife Janice in the Department of Justice cafeteria. That's my romantic story. And then got married, and then moved to the burbs and moved out to Montgomery County, started life here. And so ran for political office. Actually, with Delegate Dumais, we had a district that's vast. It's by far the largest district in Montgomery County. You mentioned Potomac. It goes all the way out to the Frederick County border, because we have something called the Ag Reserve, and all the districts have to be similar. It goes from Potomac to Frederick to Poolesville, all the way to Germantown and Clarksburg. So geographically, by far, the biggest legislative district in Montgomery County. And so in the off season, I first got involved in academia when, as you know, and any of the lawyers know, when you get into the legislature. And so I got elected with Kathleen. We had an open seat for delegate that first year back in the early 2000s. Gentleman Mark Shriver of the Kennedy family ran for Congress, and there were some openings there. And we ran, Kathleen, myself, and some other folks, and we kind of flipped the district from Republican. 3 of the 4 seats have been Republican. People forget it was not that long ago when that district. Oh, I think we have somebody on the line here. But we got elected, and that was several elections ago, and had to adjust my lawyer world career at that point to accommodate the 90 days we're in Annapolis. And so still stayed in the lawyer world in DC, and then got into academia, starting with, I started teaching public policy courses at Johns Hopkins, your alma mater, Senator Zirkin, and did that for quite a long time. And now I've kind of pivoted over to the University of Maryland College Park, where I'm teaching a graduate program on healthcare policy. So between the Senate stuff and the academia stuff and still some lawyering stuff, all parts of my brain are fully engaged, and different parts of your brain for those various endeavors. But it's been a good run and I've enjoyed it. And so we're now entering the 4th year of another term and trying to figure out what I want to do next. And that's kind of big picture there. So
that is a busy life for sure. And I think it's interesting also. I mean, we talk about it quite a bit, obviously, through the state bar, that there are a dwindling number of lawyers in the legislature, far fewer than when I first got elected and fewer than when you first got elected. And you are, in fact, were a practicing attorney with the Justice Department for many years before entering politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, and I think this be the case. I think we're at an all-time low. I think we've almost never had fewer, and I think Kathleen keeps track, Delegate Dumais keeps track of the numbers sometimes, but I think we've never had fewer lawyers in the General Assembly. And I think it shows, to be perfectly candid. I think in some respects, and I know we're recording this and I'm not going to make any friends back in the General Assembly, but when we talk about the ability to frame issues, our bill hearings, the questioning, the floor debate, I think for those of us who've come from litigation or whatever, going into the General Assembly, and that pivot's not a big transition, but it is a huge transition for folks coming from other walks of life. If you're a farmer or a restaurant owner and you've never done public speaking and you walk into essentially a forum where you're the judge and the jury and there's floor debate, that is a big different kind of world. And so I think we end up with a lot of legislation with loose statutory language, or again, oratory debate, level in the House and Senate are not necessarily perhaps what a lot of folks would like to see in terms of the caliber of the debate. And so, that's kind of where we are. I think it's increasingly difficult to take 3 months off or 90 days, with billable hours or whatever, and come and spend 3 months in Annapolis. So I think over time, we've just seen fewer and fewer folks willing to run for political office, particularly a part-time state legislative sort of concept. And I think, again, we've had a brain drain in some sorts, but again, not had so few lawyers in the General Assembly ever. And I think that's problematic, I think, personally.
It's definitely a change, and one that I think is a continuing conversation with the Bar Association. Let's get into some issues. We have a lot of heavy issues to talk about with you, and we're going to start with the what's on a lot of people's minds. Certainly is in the media. As you know, and as everybody knows, we have at this point an advanced medical cannabis program. Some would say less advanced than it should be, but we have had a 20-year kind of odyssey to getting to where we are in medical cannabis. You have been a leader in really modernizing the medical cannabis, really the leader in the General Assembly, and getting us to a point where we have a functioning and good program. So, and there's so many complexities in the law that people don't really talk about. You hear to legalize or not to legalize, but there are so many issues related to this. So I'm just going to ask you a big open-ended question and just let you run with it a little bit. And we'll do some follow-ups on specific issues, but talk to me about where we are in the state of Maryland with medical cannabis and where you think we are kind of pivoting towards the potential for recreation or adult recreational use in the state.
Sure. Well, I know you were involved, you've been involved, and we're involved as well. It was not a simple thing to go from enacting a law to create a medical cannabis program in the state of Maryland to getting a program up and running, free of a lot of lawsuits. I mean, we had litigation along the way. We had, a lot of stuff. And so 2018, we sort of cleaned things up a bit. We got rid of some of the lawsuits. I was the chair of the conference committee that year that dealt with it. But in the process, we ended up with legislators, I'll just have to say, in prison as a result of some of the back and forth. And, it was messy. We're now up to about 33, 34 states that have fully blown medical cannabis programs. And yet the fact remains, it's still all these programs in 33, 34 states are in blatant violation of federal law. So when you talk about an academic topic that is really a great academic topic of federalism, which is the subject I taught at Hopkins for many years, that interplay between Congress and the states. The idea that we move forward over these years, again, in violation of federal law, continues to be a big topic as we transition or start the conversation about moving to adult use legalization. And I will say the landscape there is shifting very quickly as well. We now have 16 states that have full-blown legalization, adult use legalization, and we're having a conversation here in the state of Maryland whether to move that way. The Commonwealth of Virginia, right over the river from my Senate district, is moving quickly. We had referendums last November in several states, including in this region, New Jersey. We have New York moving forward, DC moving a certain way, New York, as I say. And then it's not just deep blue states last year they're moving. We had on that the referendum issue, states like Montana, South Dakota, Arizona. These are red, deep red or red leaning states, and they passed ballot initiatives last November to move towards adult use legalization. So the landscape is shifting nationally in our own region, as I mentioned, these states. And so I think at this point, we're going to have a serious conversation this year. Now, we still want to keep it's important that we keep a medical program going because, that particular program is serving tens and tens of thousands of Marylanders, and moving from a medical cannabis only set program, and then you introduce adult use legalization, what happens to the existing medical program? So it's a complicated issue with licensing and the rest, but I think where we are right now in Maryland is as follows. The Speaker of the House last month announced that she supports a referendum being on the ballot in November 2022, similar to what we've done in the past on gambling. Last year, sports betting was on the ballot. We've done a lot of things through the ballot, casino gambling, sports. And so that is her preference. In fact, she's created a work group that Delegate Dumais actually serves on. And that is, they had their first meeting last week and they have their own thing. I think the Speaker is not that, and just my observation, not that keen on legalization, but I think as a concession to her caucus in the House, she's agreeable to a referendum. I think in the Senate, there's a slightly different point of view. I think that we think right now that if we're going to have a referendum and the folks in the state of Maryland voted up convincingly that we should have an implementation bill ready to go and that we shouldn't defer this for years, because even if you pass a referendum, it's going to take a few years for the industry to mature and actually have a program in place. And so we're talking 2024, 2025, if you only do a referendum. We'd like to get the $300 or $400 million a year in revenue for our state sooner rather than later. We'd like to stop the mass incarceration and all the issues involving criminal justice related to cannabis. We'd like to get that moving quicker. And so I think what we're doing, we're creating our own work group that I'll be chairing. We're going to start meeting in the fall, and we're going to put together between now and session an implementation bill, a companion bill that will go with the referendum. At least that's the current plan. Obviously, we're going to continue to have conversations with the House, but if the referendum passes, then we can move to implementation. Last year, we did that with sports gambling. We just passed a referendum without an actual implementation bill, and we ended up with a big mess this year, and we spent 3 months trying to put together a bill and just delayed everything. And I don't, the argument for delay while other states, including our neighbors, are moving forward, I don't think are that compelling, but this is a tough issue. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of economic self-interest, criminal justice, a lot of people lobbying up and hiring lobbyists. So this is not a simple endeavor, and there's going to be resistance, but that I think is where we are now, but subject to, I think it's still fluid. And next year's an election year, so some of these topics could be campaign issues for a lot of folks, but I think that's where we are, big picture. But there is a lot of minutia, a lot of details involved.
So let me ask you, let me get into a little bit of the minutia that we could spend hours on this topic. But you started by saying we do have, and I remember the very first bill actually even before Delegate Dumais entered the House Judiciary, and I see her on the screen as well. Back with former Delegate Don Murphy and Dave Brinkley and so forth, where we were just trying to have some kind of a medical cannabis program for those who had AIDS or glaucoma or cancer, what have you. So, I mean, it has evolved over 2 decades. How do you, I guess one of the questions is, what is really the difference between a medical program and a recreational legal program? Is there a difference in the substances that you're getting? And I guess from just kind of a 60,000-foot view, how do you protect one over the other? If I'm somebody who maybe has some pain and now, is there a difference? Is it just going to one door versus the other door? How has it been in other states, and how do you protect kind of all these individuals and the industry that has grown up over 20 years in the state?
Well, I think that's one of the keys. So we have folks legitimately who have gone to medical cannabis for pain relief. And in fact, I had legislation this past year dealing with workers' comp. I don't know if anybody in the call does workers' comp, but if you don't want to get addicted to opioids, you may go and get your pain relief medical cannabis route. And I think that the two should be on equal footing for reimbursement for workers' comp. And I had a bill to do that just last year, but ran into resistance, surprisingly. Several states have actually passed bills to do that, where you can reimburse for workers' comp. So we have a lot of folks who really want the medical product. And so what you're really saying, is there a difference substantively in the two products, or is it just marketing? And that, I think, is a gray zone. Now, the THC levels and things like that are, at least currently, allowable in most states at a higher dosage level for medical, and than what you see elsewhere. I think that ultimately, I think it's a legitimate question. Is once you've crossed the Rubicon and folks are getting medical cannabis cards, is the product that different, that it's all kind of more marketing? And I think it's vague. I think we're in a gray zone, that it's more perception, it's more what's politically palatable. I mean, currently, Governor Hogan, who was fully supportive of our medical program, has had nothing to say about his position on adult use legalization. And I think that's partly a political discussion. But the reality is, we have a lot of patients in some states. When you move to adult use legalization, it really hurts the medical program. Nobody's going that route. And some of the medical licensees end up out of business. We don't want that to happen in Maryland, because I do think we want to protect those folks. So a lot of the medical licensees will then try to move and get a separate dual license for the new space. And that has been a way to keep the medical folks afloat. And then you would go into a dispensary, and there's, in California and other states, you have a dispensary that sells both products. But all these states that have 16, 17 states that are adult use, also most all of them have medical, and they've all handled it differently. And so that's one of the things here, is we want to see best practices from all the states. More recently, it's been Illinois and New York's, and we're looking at Virginia. So there's a lot here, Bobby. I think that is one of the issues. What do you do to the existing medical licensees? Now, one of the things we did last year, and we had legalization bills in last year. In fact, I was the sponsor of the Senate bill. We said to the medical licensees, if you want to get into the adult use space, you're going to have to pay a huge fee. And we're going to take that money and we're going to reinvest it back into impacted communities, use those dollars to create more diversity in the industry. That it was one of the challenges with our medical program. We didn't have a diverse set of licensees, and that resulted in lawsuits. And so we don't want to make that mistake again. So we're going to hit probably the medical licensees with big fees if they want to get into adult use. And then the issue of regulation. Do you have a separate regulator for the medical? Currently, it's under the health department or medical cannabis commission. But if you go to adult use, who regulates? Do you have separate regulators for the two products, or do you put that under one roof? And so that didn't really directly answer your question.
No, I think
the complexity of the topic, quite candidly.
I think it's important. I mean, particularly since these are lawyers that are going to be that, this is a state bar association. There are a ton of legal issues related to the medical cannabis program, let alone a recreational use. And I think it's important for this conversation to hear all the complexities of it. So, because this is really not an issue of to legalize or not to legalize. It's really how do you do it, and there's an entire economic background behind it, and it's very challenging to get through it. I mean,
and I should add, on the legal front, as we're sitting here having our conversation, the United States Congress is having their own discussions about everything from banking and Schedule I status, which goes to the ability of research institutions like the University of Maryland to do research. So between now and January, we reconvene, we could have activity on Capitol Hill, which could change the debate as well. And so I have to point that out also, because what happens in the United States Congress in this space is really, really important to how the states respond and react. And we action there.
And I don't want to ask you to prejudge. Obviously, there are two big commissions going on, one in the House and one soon in the Senate. So I'm not asking you to prejudge, but just in terms of some of the challenges you see, you've highlighted a few: the regulation, how to protect an existing industry that's grown up. What other challenges do you see moving forward? And just as a background, it was interesting. I was just in a state that had a legal program. And it was interesting. It was the first time I've been in one since COVID had started. And I gotta say, as somebody, and I was involved in a lot of these issues. I mean, you couldn't go 10 steps without getting a waft of marijuana. And there were children walking around and they were getting it too. And it was interesting. I mean, you really couldn't go anywhere. It was something that was quite compelling. Between that and workers' comp and employment and so forth, all these various issues, what do you see as kind of some of the really complex issues if we decide to move in this direction?
I think the good thing is the criminal justice parts of this legislation, I don't think are that contentious. I think that there is a bit of a model that's emerged in the states that have passed this kind of legislation. In Connecticut, I'd add also. So there is a formula, a model. I don't think the criminal justice topic is going to be that contentious. That the bills that were in last year were largely similar. Similarly, I think there's a huge desire to reinvest back into communities. The issue of having social equity programs that are robust. I think there's general consensus about all of that. Even some of the workplace protections, so that if you maybe you can't get fired or all these, I think there's a lot of commonality. The bills last year, after they were amended, ended up being 95% similar. Where we got into, I think it's about economic self-interest. You have existing players who don't, everybody's looking out for their own economic self-interest when it comes to licensing. How many licenses? What kinds of licenses? For example, right now in the medical program, it really deep-pocketed folks, national players. We didn't really anticipate that. I know you were involved in this subject of, when we created the program, it was, I think, largely thought to be designed for small, independent Maryland businesses who wanted to get into the space. But there's been a lot of consolidation in the industry nationally. So over time, you had bigger players come in through the use of management agreements. You didn't even know who the real owners were and get licenses. So you ended up with big players with a huge advantage over the little guys. And so the marketplace in this industry is also evolving. I have to point that out. But we're talking billions of dollars now nationally, and here in Maryland, big players. So how do you create a system where you don't need millions of dollars? So to have a grow license, you need millions and millions of dollars, but maybe not so much if you want a transport license or a delivery license. All you need is a car, or other kinds of licenses that don't have those kinds of big, large barriers to entry. And so creating, I think, a regime with licenses that you don't need millions, a little bit fairer, provides for diversity. I think the topic of diversity is very hot on a lot of levels, but in this industry, for sure. And so the quality of the social equity programs, which in some states look good on paper, but the implementation's been a big mess. We're really trying to learn. Specifically, I'm thinking of Illinois. They had what was thought to be the model social equity programs in the country in this space, and it's been a big disaster. So I think we have to learn again a little bit from other states where things look good on paper. You want an industry with the right kinds of licensing mixes. How much does it cost to get a licensing? What do you do with the existing medical players? If you have social equity applicants, and how we define that can be difficult, but do they get a leg up? And how do you do that in a way that doesn't result in litigation the day after we enact the law, which is what happened with the medical program. So there's, that, because a bunch of lawsuits will delay this thing for years. And so we have to sort of thread the needle here. So I think it's all of that. I don't think criminal justice will be a problem, but I think when you involve hundreds of millions of dollars and existing economic self-interest, you get in, and everybody in town has lobbyists, then it becomes complicated. And that's kind of, I think, where the minefield is.
Fascinating stuff. Before we move on, there are a few folks on this, and certainly some who will get it, who are interested in the criminal justice aspects of it. Obviously, in Maryland, we already expunge possession, at least under a certain amount. All marijuana is expungible at some point in time. What beyond kind of those two things, and we have decriminalization for de minimis amount that's been in play for 5-6 years at this point in time. Are there other issues in criminal justice, like kind of what are the next steps in that you see, or is this prejudging this a little bit?
Yeah, I think I shouldn't say there's no issues, but one of the issues is the judiciary. Part of it is when we talk about expungement, it has to do with, how modern are our records? I know that when this issue's come up in the past, the judiciary's actually weighed in and said, yeah, you guys put on paper all this, that, and the other. We don't have the capability to do this kind of automatic expungement stuff. We don't have the resources. Unless you're going to give us resources to do it, this always happens. We pass these nice laws and then we're told the ability to actually implement it doesn't exist. So I think in this space, when you throw out terms like expungement, sounds good, politically sounds good, but then we have another branch of government that then has to actually do it. So I think that's a whole topic. But then you still get into details, about how much can you possess, what are we talking about? And there's home cultivation, for example. There are all these other sub-issues of, I think it on and on and on. If you look at the bills from last year, these were 100-page bills, 50 pages of it was criminal justice stuff. And so, it's hard for me to kind of focus on one thing because it's like toothpaste that, you go here and it brings up something else. So I don't anticipate those being insurmountable, but I also am mindful that, which is why we'll probably put it all into one bill. I mean, there's different schools of thought. You could split this into smaller bills, and we can talk about the politics of having one more omnibus bill that has all the economic stuff and criminal justice in one big bill, as opposed to putting 2 or 3 different bills out there, which, we go to different committees. And that's a real political conversation, discussion we're still having. Similarly with the referendum, do you have a referendum and then a separate implementation bill, or do you put it all together in one big bill? Referendum plus the meats of the bill all together in one thing. So that is also kind of under discussion. So that's a great question, complicated one, but I don't think that's ultimately where the biggest challenges are going to be. And so,
well, this is I know that we've already been on for a half hour, and I know you have a hard stop in a half hour, and we do as well. So I want to get to some other big topics that you're involved in, but I hope for those lawyers who are interested in this field, I mean, it's a fascinating discussion, and to hear you talk about the various complexities of this, because it is really complex. So
I mean, for the folks out here, since I mentioned workplace protections, you get into everything about the enforceability of a contract. if you're in violation of federal law or any of the contracts as a landlord, if anybody does real estate law, you have a lease with a tenant that's in the cannabis space. They're violating federal law every day that they operate. How enforceable are those contracts? So, in the legal space, whether it's, again, workplace protection, workers' comp, contracts, enforceability, and then you've got the overhang. There's a lot of stuff here, and which is why we have legal practices popping up all over our state with focus on cannabis industry issues. And I think we're kind of only at the beginning of all that. If you look at a place like Canada, where it's full-blown legalization as a nation, you have law firms that entirely focus on this space because it's a lot of money, a lot of different issues, and it's a growth area. If you look at the stock market, the cannabis industry is flying high, really high. A lot of people making a lot of money in the stock market on cannabis ETFs and the like, but there's a lot of legal issues here for lawyers. And so
the one that you spoke about, the workers' comp one, is fascinating. Just everyday litigation practices, the idea that some insurance companies cover it and some don't, and it's different where depending on where you go across the state. There's no
and in fact, this past year, Chesapeake, which is the largest workers' comp insurer in Maryland, had always been opposed to allowing this for workers' comp. They actually stepped back and took a neutral position. They were not opposed to the bill that I brought in. It was the national players that then came in and they were opposed because it's in violation of federal law. So you even had a split in the workers' comp insurance industry on this topic. And again, other states are moving forward with bills because at the same time we're debating that, we have a massive opioid addiction problem, which was exacerbated during COVID. And the idea that, again, folks don't want to go that route and would prefer to go medical cannabis. So this subject's not going away. I'm probably going to bring this bill back. And again, our workers' comp carrier, the biggest one in here in the state of Maryland, is not even opposed to the bill anymore. So this is also a kind of an evolving space.
Interesting.
Workers' comp commissioners, including a couple of them, have actually ordered that the insurer reimburse from this space. So we have actually some activist workers' comp commissioners not waiting for the legislature to weigh in and issuing orders themselves on this topic.
Well, thank you for this really good conversation about this issue. Let's move on to another big one, healthcare policy. And I know that you teach that and have taught about healthcare policy. That's a big topic in the finance committee, again, where you're the vice chair. So just on, again, open-ended question.
Sure.
Let's talk Maryland and healthcare policy and kind of the big topics that are coming up.
Yeah, this is a huge, so healthcare policy. I will make this point. The Senate Finance Committee has the broadest subject matter jurisdiction of any committee in the General Assembly. Healthcare is one of them. And so it's separate than Finance Committee. I am the co-chair of a commission in Maryland called the Health Insurance Coverage Protection Commission that I co-chair with Delegate Jocelyn Pena-Melnick from Prince George's County. And we were created about 3 years ago when there was talk about repealing the Affordable Care Act and replacing it. And there's always been talk about the Affordable Care Act being thrown out by the Supreme Court. So we created a commission a few years back. What will Maryland do if the ACA goes away? Because the ACA has been very successful in Maryland. We went from about 12% uninsured in Maryland 6-7 years ago to 6% today. So we've cut that in half. At the same time, we've reduced the premiums for healthcare in Maryland by about 30% over the last 3 years. And how have we done it? We've done some really innovative things. And this commission, which just met last week, because we do these reports and we have recommendations for legislative things, the upcoming session, we've done that for 3 or 4 years very successfully. So we've candidly passed first in the nation bills in the healthcare space to basically, again, try to get premiums down and also get our rate of uninsured down. And the reason that's important is the more people that have health insurance, it makes it cheaper for everybody else. And how do we get young, healthy people? No longer, there is no mandate anymore. So we have young, healthy people dropping off of the health insurance rolls. So if you're a business, it helps, your healthcare costs go down. It helps individuals in the individual market. And it's a huge national topic. And this past year with COVID, we had a lot of action on that space. And when it comes to telehealth, obviously, not everybody rushing their doctors.
Right.
Health equity outcomes in certain communities. So we spent a lot of time last session on health equity, changing state law to let folks see their doctor via Zoom. But all that requires changes in state law. And we did some things on pharmaceutical drug pricing, on if you do your state tax return now and you have no health insurance, you can actually check a box starting this year that say, I have no health insurance and I want my financial information to be shared with our Obamacare exchange to see if I'm eligible for Medicaid, I'm eligible for federal tax credits to help me buy health insurance. A lot of people don't even know that they qualify for these other things. And we are doing things to allow them a mechanism, even if it's just check a box. We were the first in the United States to do this. Now 10 states have now modeled Maryland just this past year, this so-called easy enrollment program. So that's a model. Pharmaceutical Drug Affordability Board for drug prices, first in the nation. Last year we created in Maryland. Now 20 states are creating, have bills in right now modeling Maryland. We have the largest state reinsurance program in the nation in Maryland that we created 3 years ago on a very bipartisan basis with Governor Hogan, which has reduced our health insurance premiums in the individual Obamacare market. So we're doing a lot of stuff in healthcare. So it's a good time for me to be teaching at the University of Maryland, College Park on the subject, but we really are leading the nation on healthcare innovation. And so I'm excited, and we're gonna have more stuff, particularly with COVID. All these topics have come to the forefront in a big way from a policy standpoint.
So you were also involved in medical debt protection, which I thought is another interesting issue.
Yeah, so this past session, this year, we passed something called the Medical Debt Protection Act, a bill that I brought in. This is also a hot topic. You know, the biggest cause of bankruptcy in the United States for folks is medical debt. And in Maryland, we had some laws that gave the hospitals the ability to go heavy debt collection, garnishing wages, taking your house, and there were no guardrails at all, no protections. So we put in place some new laws. The Maryland hospitals did not like it. They were opposed, and yet we managed to get a bill out that put some guardrails on these collection practices. And so we have some protections in place we didn't have just 1 year ago, again, specifically dealing with garnishments of wages, taking somebody's primary residence. And it was really designed to try to get folks, more Marylanders, into payment plans, that the hospitals really need to roll over backwards to try to get you into a payment plan, as opposed to rushing out and messing up your credit scores for the rest of your life and all that, which has been a huge problem for many years. So, and again, COVID, yet again, we had folks go to the hospital with COVID and walk out with $1 million bills at ICU. And you know, that should never happen in the United States. You know, the bottom line there, Bobby, is that nobody should become homeless or have their lives completely ruined financially as a result of getting sick. And so this was designed to make that less likely to happen, and yet it's still a big national problem. So the Medical Debt Collection Act of Maryland, which we just passed in 2021, was a bill I'm really happy to have sponsored, and it did pass, and the governor did sign it over the objection of the Maryland hospitals, I would add.
Let me just ask a follow-up to that. What are some of the specific things? And I guess, like, and it's, again, that was never in my these are bills that never came before Judiciary, JPR. So these are a little outside my wheelhouse. But what are, you know, if you're a hospital and somebody comes in for a visit in the ER or what have you, and you bill them, how are they to collect, and kind of what are the guardrails for the consumer, and what are the guardrails for the person, for the doctors, for the hospital, or whatever, that the medical practice in terms of getting paid for their services?
Well, they still have all the standard collection practices for the most part available to them. But what the bill's really focused on, in effect, was before you do that, you're going to have to go through a bunch of hoops. For example, a lot of folks, you know, have run things through their insurance, and the insurance has been denied. Before the hospital starts collecting, let the appeal process with the insurance company run its course, or specific things that the hospitals have to do to make folks understand what's available, what kind of relief could be. We don't have public hospitals in Maryland. So if you're low income, you may be entitled to charity care or financial assistance. And the year earlier in 2020, we actually changed the financial assistance kind of rules for our hospitals. But a lot of folks don't even know that that's even available to them. You know, like I even said about being eligible for Medicaid or for health insurance purposes, same thing with the hospitals. And so we had a series of sort of things to say, before you go debt collection or report to the credit agencies, let's have a window of a period of months, you know, a sort of a cooling off period before you do all that. And I think that makes a huge, huge difference. And so, you know, it's kind of like before you file a lawsuit, you have to go through sort of the administrative process, okay, to see if you can resolve. Same thing here. We had a lot of hospitals rushing to report to the credit agencies, to hire debt collectors and all the rest without payment plan process maybe being offered, seeing if they're eligible for some charity care assistance. And in many cases, those dollars these folks were qualifying for these programs, didn't even know because they weren't even offered. So it's a whole range of things, Bobby, no one size fits all solution. But I think between the financial assistance bill we passed in 2020 for the hospitals, and then the debt collection bill we passed this year, which wasn't perfect, you know, I think we're making some progress. There's actually more here that I think we could do, but we did what was politically possible with the opposition at every turn by the Hospital Association and other folks. So,
and that was signed into law by Governor Hogan as well?
Correct. So the financial assistance bill in 20, and then followed up this year with the Debt Collection Act in 2021. So there's a whole new regime of law in place for patients.
Interesting. A lot of activity in that area. And there is another big, and again, I'm mindful of the clock, so I keep looking. I want to make sure we get some of these topics in. Clean energy is another huge issue, both nationally and in the state. And you've been a leader on that as well, also through the Finance Committee. Again, open-ended question: where are we? Where and what are we looking toward in this coming session?
Well, I would say, like cannabis policy, this is a changing landscape quickly. You know, the issue of climate change is big. So 2 years ago, I sponsored something called the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act. It's going to take Maryland to 50% renewable energy by 2030. And so right now, with the infrastructure bill on the Hill, states like Maryland are well positioned to get a huge investment of federal dollars. And so climate is one part of this discussion, but quite candidly, my bill was focused more on the economic upside potential for our state in the clean energy space, whether it's solar, wind. We had a big announcement a few weeks ago from US Wind. They're going to have this massive new facility at Sparrows Point, Baltimore County, that they're going to build wind turbines for the entire East Coast. And this is all part of, depending what's on the federal legislation, Biden administration's really, I think, a high priority is to invest in clean energy, whether it's more EV money or whatever, but it's really about those dollars in the states that put policies in place in this space for jobs and the rest are going to be the states that are big beneficiaries of federal investments, which in turn, I think, again, we have a lot of upside potential here in the state of Maryland because we've been out front. And I see this being a growth sector. We've been so dependent for so long in my area, in the DC area, on federal jobs. We have to grow our private sector portfolio, and whether it's the life sciences and biotech, because economic development is also a subject within the Finance Committee. You know, life sciences has been a big part of Maryland sort of plan, but I think clean energy is increasingly another subject area with a lot of upside potential. If I might give one shout out, the Clean Energy Jobs Act ran into a lot of opposition from a lot of groups. It passed by one vote in the House Economic Matters Committee, and Delegate Dumais was the deciding vote. So we passed it literally by one vote in 2019. But I think the political momentum to do more on clean energy, more on climate, I think that's, I don't think we're going backward. Maryland's closing its coal-fired power plants as we sit here. Most of the coal-fired power plants in Maryland are going to be gone or out of commission in about 5 years. And so we've got a plan for the future. And I think clean energy's, space is the answer. So yeah, these are big issues, and we could use.
What were some of the controversies of it, if you don't mind, if we could just dig a little bit deeper into that? Like, what were the, what was the opposition? It sounds, to the general statement about it, obviously seems kind of mom and apple pie and complex, but all good. What were some of the opponents' problems with the legislation?
Well, I think ultimately whenever you change energy policy, one of the first questions, what are the impacts on ratepayers? There was a time, I think since you were in the legislature at the time, we had special sessions specifically dealing with big rate increases, in our utilities. So a lot of it, is economic interest. Is it going to cause energy costs if you mandate that you must go to clean energy? How does it stack up vis-a-vis natural gas or conventional coal fire, and is everybody going to have to pay more money on their monthly electric bills? So a lot of it really ends up being about that, because the politics of that impacts every Marylander. And back in, I think it was 2006, because we went to a different model in Maryland how we do energy policy, and there was a special session, and that was specifically devoted to utility costs and all that. So this is a hot political subject, and it can lend itself, on the one hand, we want to go clean energy, but at what cost is it going to cause everybody's utility rates to go up by what's palatable and so a lot of it, I think, ends up being about that very specific issue.
Any kind of follow-up legislation in terms of clean energy that this year?
Yeah, so we what constitutes clean energy? I mean, we actually had a lot of activity here this past session on that subject, and so we made a big play on geothermal. So now, part of the topic is, if you're going to have a program, we have something called Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard. What constitutes clean energy, and what kinds of clean energy do we want to incentivize, and what other kinds of energy do we not? So, for example, in Maryland, we've had debate about these waste to energy for trash incineration. Does that constitute clean energy that we want to subsidize or help out, versus geothermal or solar or wind? We had something called black liquor. We had a paper mill in Western Maryland, very controversial, where it had a lot of big jobs. Labor groups did not, and I should throw organized labor gets involved, because if you're going to close coal-fired power plants or paper mills, you're going to lose union jobs. So you get into things that aren't even energy policy. It pits the unions and labor against the environmental communities in our state. There's been a lot of friction over the years between labor and environmental, and it has to do with jobs and loss of jobs. And so that's where you get into, again, another political complexity in this space is where is that fine line, that tension? And so whether it's paper mills or waste to energy, or coming up with new technologies, there's new technologies that we passed some stuff this year, particularly geothermal. So it's an evolving space. And I should say the University of Maryland in particular is doing some great research. And I had a bill with Delegate Chi from District 15 to allow the University of Maryland this year to really go big on clean energy technology, which is another space where there's a lot of upside potential for us. Unfortunately, I will say the governor vetoed that bill for various reasons. And one of the things I think what we're going to do in the clean energy technology bill is that's one I think will override governor's veto. He didn't like the fact that we were mandating that he direct a certain amount of money to the University of Maryland to do this research. Governors like to have the discretion to decide in the budget where the money goes. We actually mandated in our bill that the governor must deploy this money to our Maryland Clean Energy Center, which we created in the General Assembly, and to the University of Maryland Clean Energy Technology Group. So there's a lot of moving parts in clean energy, and we're only at the beginning. If you follow what's happening again on the Hill right now with infrastructure, that's one of the big topics. How much are we going to put towards clean energy? And a lot of that money is going to go to the states, and the states are going to have to figure out what to do with it. So it's an exciting time to be talking about that subject.
Amazing topics. we only have a few minutes left. And so I guess let me just open it up for, we've talked about cannabis and healthcare and clean energy. Those are all huge topics, but what have I missed in
well, we're about to enter something, unusual. Not only will it be an election year where we're going to be electing a new governor, a new comptroller, maybe even a new attorney general, we may have a new state treasurer. There's a lot going on in the state of Maryland right now in the electoral. Plus, I should throw this in, we're going to have something called redistricting. So every 10 years, it only happens every decade, we redo the maps for Congress and we redo the maps for the state legislative districts. And we're now in one of those 10 years. Now, what's interesting, this time in the history of our state, we've never actually had this process go on when we've had a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature, a governor and a legislature of different parties. So we're in uncharted territory for literally in the history of our state. And in a time which has been historic. I mean, we adjourned last year for the first time since the Civil War because of COVID. We've been operating in little NHL penalty boxes. It's been really, really, and now we're going into a redistricting, which can be highly contentious, highly political for the folks running for Congress and state. And then at the same time, we have all these statewide offices being contested. So it's keep an eye on all that. That's going to be not anything but boring. And again, the courts can get involved. Oftentimes when we do these redistricting maps, there's almost always going to be a lawsuit. We have a new chief judge of our Court of Appeals, a former colleague of ours, Joe Getty. So if I might just say one thing about that.
My former seatmate on both.
Former seatmate of former Senator Zirkin is now the new chief judge. And our new chief judge could get some action here on redistricting, because unlike most issues, redistricting map challenges can go directly to the Court of Appeals. And Chief Judge Getty, again, former legislator, colleague of ours, is now the chief judge. And he was put there, and I guess I'll just put it out there. We have a mandatory retirement age of 70. The new chief judge will turn 70 in April. And so, I'll just say this, we're a little unfiltered. Some people looking at that appointment, knowing that you've just made a new appointment for a new chief judge who's going to be leaving in April by state law, he's there to deal with one maybe issue, redistricting challenges. So, for us lawyers here, this is something to keep an eye on. I should say Mary Ellen Barbera, a good friend of a lot of ours from Montgomery County, I think was a great chief judge, and I'm sure Joe will do a good job, but I'd be remiss if I just didn't point out, since we know Joe and he's leaving in April, but not too late to not hear one of those redistricting challenges that can go right to the Court of Appeals. So I don't know if Joe's on the line, but maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I crossed into some space that I shouldn't have, but I thought I'll just get that out there.
Well, it's definitely an interesting legal issue that is coming down the pike. And there was a map that was put out. I mean, this is something that's a little bit more in the weeds in politics, but there was a map that I saw that was put out that looked beautiful and certainly Maryland's in the hot seat in terms of some, at least of our congressional districts, because of the way that our map.
And Congressional 6, where I live, was the subject of a challenge that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And so, we're right now trying to figure out, we have to build a record, because the last time we went through this, folks, including our former Governor O'Malley, had their depositions taken, which was part of the record. So this is a good lawyer issue on a lot of levels. I would also note to Bobby that it wasn't that long ago in 2002 where the court itself drew a new map. It thought that our redistricting maps were unconstitutional, did not remand the matter back to the legislature to come up with a new map. The court itself drew a map. And, so we may be back in that now the congressional maps would go to the federal courts, just to make it clear. It's only the state legislative maps would go through the state system or directly to our Court of Appeals, and the court could just do its own map and pretty much ignore the General Assembly's maps and the governor's map. I would say the General Assembly has the upper hand here. The governor has power, but it's much more limited relative to the legislature. So this is, generally the legislature's got the big upper hand vis-a-vis the governor on these subjects, but ultimately the court can can trump everybody here, as they did back in 20 years ago.
Senator Feldman, we have, this has gone quickly, but we've run out of time for this hour. And I'm, again, mindful of your schedule this morning, but I just wanted to thank you so much for this conversation about such big topics that will all be coming into the Maryland General Assembly this year. And I want to thank you for your years of service and for taking the lead on so many of these really complex issues. So, and thanks for being with us.
And thanks for the invite, Bobby. And it's, we miss you. And it's, again, I see a lot of familiar faces here on the call, but this was great. So thanks a bunch.
Richard, you want to finish it up?
Yeah, Senator Feldman, thanks so much for taking time to come and join us, and we hope you'll do it again at some point in the future. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this morning, and keep an eye on your inboxes for future emails for coffee and conversation with legislators. Thank you very much for joining us, and everybody have a great day.